Welcome back, baseball fans. 1980-83 carryover fall league, and we have draft results. We have done the 8 rounds of the draft. 256 players drafted. Doesn't mean this league is set up at all, as we have a token round of the draft, free agency, coming up. This draft, though, this video is going to kind of go through. I'm not going to go through all these picks. There's too many, but I'm just going to go through each of the teams, look at some of the highlights of the draft, the turning points of the draft. Sometimes it's not the first round pick that makes the team. It could just be finding a player fall to them that really fills a need, and kind of see if they really help them out a lot or not. We're just going to go through each team, and I'll identify a player I like, and we'll see how this goes after that. So we'll start with Seattle. We're going to know the blue, and in most of these, there are 128 keepers, and there's 256 draft picks, which would be half if all the keepers were picked. And I can explain that all but 9 were picked. I could even identify the 9 since we're doing this, because they're still eligible in the token round of the draft to be selected. So 9 guys did not get drafted, and they had a level of protection. There's Enrique Romo, Elias Sosa, Rick Russell, William Martinez, Nino Espinosa, Jerry White, John Milner, Rick Wise, Otto Velez. Various ages and states of their careers. For some reason or another, the teams decided to go a different direction. So out of 128 keepers, the fact that it's only 9 shows that we did a reasonably good job choosing the guys to keep. And then the waived guys obviously are going to be moving into different teams. When you see a gap here with no color in it like this, the white, these are new players, new to the league players, and that's not necessarily rookies. When you see a red line like that, it means we called this guy out of retirement, which is really cool to see that happen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 guys. 8 guys got pulled out of retirement. Think about that. While 9 guys weren't kept, to kind of balance that out a little bit. And then more critical, or most critical, as to why the draft's not done is this light green color means a player was improved, so nobody was added. So that team has a vacancy on the roster, and that's what undrafted free agency is about. So before we get to all that, let's kind of go through each team. So with Seattle, I actually liked that their keepers weren't fantastic, but I did like the fact that they brought up Matt Young as a 24-year-old in his best and pretty much only good year, with a 3.27 ERA. And they also found Mike Scott's last year with the Mets before he's sent to Houston. It takes Mike Scott a while. He doesn't start to become a really dominant pitcher until 85, 86 with the Astros. So those are nice picks for Seattle. Nothing special, nothing to suggest that they've transformed their team. The Twins, they added Tom Bernansky, so you get the idea that some of the pieces that you'd like to think get to 1987 and Tom Kelly's Twins and won the World Series. They got Kent Urbick last year. They got Tom Bernansky. They'll probably get Kirby Puckett next year. They won't hold on to Bernansky long, but they have him. Otherwise, there's nothing. They're kind of in between eras trying to figure stuff out. Nothing special about the Twins here. Colorado Rockies. Well, one guy who fell to them was Gary Renicky, a Baltimore outfielder, a 27-year-old outfielder who finally played 477 at-bats. He used to be a platoon player, played almost an entire year in 1982 with an 891 OPS. So getting him as an everyday player, and then adding the pitchers Pena and McWilliams, they're trying to improve. I give them credit for those moves. San Diego decided to go young And even these guys aren't even that young. I guess by age, you got the young De Leon's 23, Tim Lawler 26, Dave Dravecky 27, Bobby Brown 29. And this would be their first year of the carryover league. May not be their rookie year, but at least the Padres are deciding to try something. They're always trying to figure out how to be competitive. Now they're going young. Gotta love Boston's draft. Surprised that they're drafting this high, but they keep bringing back Lynn, Eckersley, Rice, improving Wade Boggs. They added a Jack O'Connor, who's okay as a starter, lefty starter in the rotation, but they also added 40-year-old Louis Tiant. He's not going to be the only guy to reunite with a team from a bygone era. But Louis Tiant, at 40 years old, returns to Boston for a farewell season. So that's kind of, that'll be fun. Sometimes in this fall league, I just like to do fun things. It's not done as analytically, I suppose, as the Summer League, which goes through more levels of preparation. Florida Marlins, Pascual Perez will anchor the staff. Nothing really stands out about them. They're in expansion teams are always in a similar boat. You never know what you're going to get. Detroit Tigers, we know they go to the '84 series. They're starting to gear up for that. They're still about a year or two away. They got Lou Whitaker and Lance Parrish better, but they have 2 vacant roster spots. And not much else beyond what we already know. All right, next up, the Cubs, and this team might very well be the darling of the draft. They may have had the best draft. As you know, when I sit down and make this video, what I remember the most is how everything the Cubs did seemed to work. And when I look at the assemblage of parts, it's almost like I cheated for them or something, and it really wasn't the case. It's just like everything fell the whole time. So they had Lee Smith as their first pick, immediately replacing and improving upon Bruce Sutter, who they would then trade to St. Louis to acquire draft capital. Pat Tabler will fill in admirably at third base as an everyday player who's an E6, great, incredibly good E rating for third base, but a bad fielding rating of 4. And then from here, it gets even better. They got Julio Cruz, so they're getting some defense. They got Julio Cruz, a 2 second baseman from Seattle. He actually went to the White Sox, and the Cubs could still send him to the South Side. In the final round, let me skip to the final round, they also got Mark Belanger. So they have a 2s at the double play. So this is the best infield defense the Cubs have had in a while. They got Rick Sutcliffe, who had a really bad 1980 with the Dodgers, who ended up in the retirement bin, and they got his 82 card. Of course, we know Sutcliffe pitches for the Cubs in '84, but they got his 82 card. And believe it or not, the biggest prize in all of this is that they got Kenny Singleton, who Baltimore had to put on waivers because you can only keep 4 guys. In Baltimore, he was the 5th Beatle. Baltimore, it was Eddie Murray, Scott McGregor, Mike Flanagan, Tippy Martinez, and 33-year-old Ken Singleton was put on waivers, and the Cubs said, this guy's got juice left in him. 1980, 304, 882. When you put the whole thing together, this is a home run draft for the Cubs. On so many levels, I don't even know who the best pick is. Is it Lee Smith? Is it Sutcliffe? Is it Singleton? Is it getting a good defense in the infield? I don't know, but it's a win-win-win-win. It all started with unloading Dave Kingman and unloading Bruce Sutter. That's the best thing that ever could have happened to the Cubs in this league, at least. Next up, the Blue Jays, a team that is preparing for an era in the mid-'80s where they're very good. Before the timeline, I stopped playing the timeline by 84, 85. So they did get Lloyd Mosby better. They got Jesse Barfield. And interesting enough, they needed a lefty starter, and they got Bill Lee. They got his Expo card, actually, in '81, so that's pretty cool. Ohio players, they have a nucleus that they keep improving without adding outside players. So they made Jerry Mumphrey and George Hendrick their best cards. Will they have enough for a 20-man roster? 16-man roster is probably incredibly good, but the last 4 picks will probably sink or swim this team. Giants. Couple neat little moves in this. Yeah, there's a couple neat and fun moves here. Getting John Fulgham off the Cardinals as a number 3 starter was nice. Also, drafting Andy Van Slyke out of the Cardinals system was also nice, taking him away from the Cardinals before he goes to the Pirates. Bob Boone was put on waivers by the Phillies in a similar way that Ken Singleton was put on waivers by the Orioles. They just did not. Those really good championship caliber teams don't have enough room for a 5th keeper. So Bob Boone goes on waivers with a -4 arm. And now the Giants have a -4 catcher in a division with the speedy Astros and the speedy Dodgers. So that's good. And sentimentally, like Louis Tiant to the Red Sox, we got Bobby Bonds to fare well with the Giants, even though he hit just .203. He's the 20th player. He's literally in a platoon corner outfield situation, so he won't play a lot anyway. But Bobby Bonds will play a final year with the Giants. Pirates next, and this is one of the Pirates and then the White Sox back-to-back are very frustrating drafts. Just could not find the right players in the right spots. The best acquisition for the Pirates is Johnny Ray, the second baseman, who they will eventually move to the California Angels, along with John Candelaria eventually goes to the Angels. But for now, they got to cross their fingers that Willie Stargell and Dave Parker have something left in them. And then, of course, the White Sox. So at this point, when I'm drafting the White Sox, I just kind of like my enthusiasm just collapsed when I realized that this team cannot catch a ball. They are horrific defensively. So bad defensively that you can't fix this. And this could be years before they fix this horrible defense. So the good news defensively is that Harold Baines plays right field. They went out and got Chris Chambliss, who was a free agent. Good first baseman, good rangy first baseman. So they have Chambliss can play some defense. Baines can play some defense. They have Rusty Kuntz, who's a part-time outfielder who can catch the ball. They have Stan Pappy, a utility infielder who can catch the ball. But outside of that, they held on to Jim Morrison, who clanks balls off his glove. They have Eric Soderholm, who can't catch. They got Rudy Law, who can't catch. They got Oscar Gamble, who can't catch. They got Lamar Johnson, who can't catch. This is going to be one of the worst defensive teams I've ever put together. But the good news is they got Richard Dotson, 22-game winner in '83. So Dotson, Burns, Lamar Hoyt, and a good Dennis Lamp. The starting rotation of the White Sox is probably the highlight of this team. In a couple of years, they'll get Greg Walker. They'll get better defense. They might get Pachuca. They might trade for Julio Cruz. But right now, it's a little shaky. And frankly, the White Sox are probably looking up at the Kansas City Royals and the Milwaukee Brewers anyway, with no real realistic chance. Very shaky. Dodgers won the World Series 2 years ago. Had no problem extending Steve Garvey, Ron Cey, Dave Lopes, and Bill Russell. To that point, in a clever move, they actually added Steve Sachs to play second base, and so Davey Lopes can be a 38-year-old designated hitter. Because remember, there was no designated hitter back in this era, so they can keep Lopes and Sachs as teammates. Also, they combated the Giants' move of Bob Boone by adding some speed of Alan Wiggins, Double-A stealing present outfielder. Eventually, he'll be he'll move to the infield. Next up, Arizona, and nothing particularly amazing here, though they added two pretty cool pitchers. In that, what you call, how would you say this? The small sample size guys, the extra player cards that Strat prints, don't necessarily pitch a lot of innings, but they do it really good in a short period of time. So they're not household names, but you have Andy Rincon and Ed Vandenberg. Rincon was a Cardinal, only pitched 36 innings, but he did it with a 1.77 ERA. at Vandenberg was actually, he had some nice years in Seattle, 237 ERA. So taking advantage of small sample size is an expansion team, Arizona. Next up, Kansas City. And are they tooling up for a World Series after a disappointing year? The answer is yes. It started great with the 344 hitting Butch Davis and the 912 OPS of Willie Aikens. They got a nice Claudell Washington card with power and base stealing to platoon in the outfield. Shane Rawley, they kept him around. He wasn't even on Kansas City, but he played so well they kept him. They traded for Mike Lacoste from the National League, brought him to the American League. Good pitcher. And Rich Gale's best year is 1980. So this Kansas City team is ready, I declare, to compete for a World Series in the final year of George Brett's 1980 card. The Cardinals, mixing eras together. Okay, they're not going to have the 82 Cardinals of Ozzie Smith and Lonnie Smith yet, because their teams are holding on to those players. But the good news is they get to hold on to Keith Hernandez and Gary Templeton, who are statistically very good, while adding Bruce Sutter and improving Tommy Herr to his .323 year of 1983, a year after they won the World Series. So you can see you've got .321 Hernandez, .321 Herr, and .319 Templeton, plus a .293 Oberfell out of this Cardinal team. And they don't even have the full complement of 1982 World Series participants yet. They're looking good in that division. Probably, I would buy Cardinal stock and probably sell Pirate stock. We know the Cardinals are going to be good all the way through 87 in this decade. Texas Rangers are one of these teams that mixes and matches players from other organizations. They go outside of the Rangers system quite frequently. They have a Frank Tavares, they have a Larry Bittner, a Kiko Garcia. They went and got Bob Shirley from the National League, Dave Roberts from the National League. But the good news about Texas is that division is weak. Oakland is better. Seattle is, you saw they were the first pick in the draft. And the Angels are still a confusing mess, even though they've gone to the League Championship Series 3 years in a row. They might be running out of magic in Anaheim. So Texas can still compete in the weakest division in the game. Atlanta. Yeah, they held on to Gary Matthews, 80. They improved Rick Camp and Rafael Ramirez. Royster's best year. Bob Brenly will play for the Braves instead of the Giants, at least for this first year. I don't know how to report on that. It's okay. I don't remember anything exciting there. Sometimes teams just don't have an opportunity to make an incredible splash, and Atlanta did not splash. Oakland. Well, Oakland is, again, they're like the Rangers, like Seattle. They're in a weak division, and anybody could win this thing. And they got the great outfield, Henderson, Murphy, and Armas. So they have a bunch of infielders. They literally added Tim Foley, Tony Phillips, Phil Garner, and Danny Ainge. They added 4 infielders to Keith Drumright, Wayne Gross. I believe 9 Oakland players are land animals and cannot fly in the outfield. They have 9 non-outfielders joining Ricky Henderson, Dwayne Murphy, and Tony Armas. So I hope none of those outfielders gets hurt. Their legs are going to get tired from running around all the time. Las Vegas, nice little draft here. Holding on to Winfield, keeping him away from the Yankees. They got the Commissioner Award, so they got the extra pick. They took Bill North as a speedy leadoff guy. Jim Kern had arm troubles, missed a season, and then he came back with a nice year in 81. He's good. They improved Denny into a 237 ERA in 83, which I think he was on the Cy Young list. And Woody Fryman's best year as a closer is 1980 at age 40 with a 113 whip. So yeah, this Vegas team's very good. The Mets had an awesome draft. This is a heck of an exciting draft. Now, they're still a year away because they don't have Dwight Gooden and Ron Darling in the pitching yet. So the pitching's still a little bit behind. But to get Darryl Strawberry and Mookie Wilson and Jesse Orozco, now you're starting to see a little bit of those 86 Mets come here. You still have Mazzilli, Tom Hausman, Ray Knight. You still have Reardon, by the way. He hasn't gone to the Expos yet, and so that's a good sign. So I expect the Mets to challenge the Phillies in the East for the division, with Atlanta and Florida lagging a little bit. Surprised that Atlanta would lag when in 1982 they won the National League West, but for some reason it's just not working in the American National League East for them. All right, so Baltimore suffered the loss of Ken Singleton, which is tough because it's hard to tell the story of the Orioles without him here. And the Cubs ended up getting him. And we know the Cubs in this era weren't very good. We know Baltimore was. That's sort of the byproduct of a carryover league. I mean, the top teams get their talent taken away a little bit, and the bottom feeders get better. And so it hurt Baltimore to lose Singleton. There's no sugarcoating it. They did, however, improve Cal Ripken into his 83 MVP card, and they did improve John Lowenstein into a 1017 OPS performance in 82. So, and to replace, you're not going to replace Singleton, but they actually got Terry Harper, a 25-year-old outfielder from the Braves, who brings defense and speed and a little bit of power, a 356 on base. So he will help cushion the blow of losing Singleton. Cleveland's doing good stuff, and they're ready to compete in that division with the world champion Expos, Tigers, and Ohio players. They keep bringing back the H guys: Hara, Hargrove, Hassey, Hood, Heath. A bunch of guys with the letter H in their name. They got Bud Black. They finally got a decent lefty starter. They haven't had one in years. Dan Spillner, a reliable reliever. That's a pretty good Cleveland team. They will compete for that division, but the Expos, the world champs, would still be considered the favorite. Houston has made, one thing Houston has done in this draft is established that we're going to knock the bats out of all right-handed batters as best we can, because we have J.R. Richards, 190 ERA. We have Nolan Ryan's 169 ERA. And we also signed this guy, Randy Moffett, who right-handed batters don't have a hit on this card. So it's very rare for a team to have that much dominant pitching versus right-handed batters. So a team is literally going to have to load up with lefties to beat these Houston pitchers. And they have enough offense and speed to score runs with they bumped Dickie Thon into a 20 home run year at shortstop. Jose Cruz hitting 318. They still have Sambito and Dave Smith closing games out. Heck, they got Joe Niekro having his best year, joining Nolan Ryan and J.R. Richard. So, yeah, watch out for the Astros out west. It's going to be them, the Dodgers, fighting it out, possibly the Giants. The Yankees, hey, they had a good draft for the first time in a while. I've been banging on the Yankees for their failure to get to a World Series and having questionable draft moves. But this draft was actually pretty good. The guys you would expect are here: Tommy John, Ron Guidry, Greg Nettles. They held on to Jim Spencer for one more year. But they took Bryn Smith away from the Expos. Remember, the Expos won the World Series and knocked the Yankees out of the playoffs, so they took one of their future star pitchers. They fixed their bench with a good backup catcher and a good corner outfielder in Al Cowan. So overall, the Yankees should be able to get back to the playoffs again. And again, this is 80 to 83. So 80, they won 103 games. 81, they went to the World Series. Now 82 and 83 were not so kind to the Yanks. All right, Milwaukee. It is World Series or bust for the Brewers. If you watched the league or the divisional round series a year ago, They had a chance to close out against the California Angels, and they blew a save in the ninth. It was Tom Hume who blew a save in the ninth. Well, they added Pete Ladd to their team. Pete Ladd in 83 had a 2.55 ERA and a 0.932 whip. Now, 83 is a year after the Brewers went to World Series, but they have him now. They made Jim Gantner better. They made Moose Haas better. Charlie Moore is in his best year. Now, Lezcano takes a little bit of a dip. Gorman Thomas's average goes up, but his power goes down a little bit. But you still have Molitor and Yount and Cecil Cooper. This is a World Series or bust team. The Expos, the Brewers, the Royals are probably some combination of the three best teams in the American League right now. The Big Red Machine, and they were the number one seed in the National League, and they're still doing great stuff. The old guard's coming back. Remember, 81, they had the best record in baseball, and we have Johnny Bench's 81 where he hits 309. We have George Foster hitting 295. Griffey 294 in 1980. Concepcion a 1/20 shortstop in 82. We improved Mario Soto into his best card. We have acquired and improved Brett Butler to play center field instead of, I believe they would have had Eddie Milner and then eventually Eric Davis. But Brett Butler is a pretty darn good center fielder. So the Reds, they can compete for that number one seed again. The Reds, the Cubs, and the Cards, and then Pittsburgh dragging the rear. That's what it looks like in that division. The Angels, you may recall, have been to 3 consecutive league championship series. They lost to Baltimore, then they beat Baltimore, then lost the World Series to the Dodgers, and then they just lost the league championship to the Expos. All the teams they lost to won the World Series. But it's not as jovial as you think because they just have some strange parts on this team. You need all-star credentials out of Bobby Grich, Brian Downing, Don Baylor, Dan Ford, and probably some other guys who aren't here right now, like Rod Cruz not here, Freddie Lynn's not here. They have DeCinces with his all-star credentials. They went out and got Gene Richards to play center field. They don't really care about defense. They liked his 301 average and his AA. But yeah, the Angels are destined for a fall, or at least the Angels, the Oakland A's, Texas Rangers, they're all sort of in a lump in the West, but not nearly as talented as Milwaukee, Kansas City, the Expos, the Orioles to a degree, the Yankees, and maybe even the Red Sox to a degree. Portland's draft. They got some players that other organizations miss. Chet Lemon, oh boy. He'd be a one center fielder on a White Sox team that has terrible defense. They have Rudy Law playing center field, dropping balls for him. Bob Horner, the Braves miss him. Terry Poole, the Astros miss him. They got Willie Upshaw in this draft, who had a great year with the Blue Jays in 83. So, this is a good Portland team. Portland and Las Vegas in that division. And the last two teams, the Phillies, who got stumped, really got embarrassed by their getting swept by the Expos in the World Series 4 straight. Rose is coming back. Gross, Maddox, and Boa. Very comparable. Boa's no longer a 1 at short. He's a 2E17. That's still great. And Tidrow will help their bullpen. Warren Brewster. Frankly, they replaced players. I don't think they got better. They were already outstanding. You're talking about the 1980 World Champions. They were also very good at 81. So they're kind of running it back. I don't think anybody gets better, but they're pretty close. Wilfong hit 310. Now he's hitting 248. I think Boa's batting average improves. Brewster and Tidrow are probably improvements in the bullpen. Gary Maddox's batting average goes up slightly, and Pete Rose is better defensively now. He's a 2 first baseman instead of a 4. Greg Gross is doing Greg Gross stuff, hitting around 300. Would have been a great designated hitter if if the National League had one in this time. Yeah, the Phillies and the Mets are probably the class of that division. And lastly, the World Champion Expos. So they started this draft by improving. Well, actually, the first thing they did was putting Gary Carter in his best year, improving Steve Rogers from being the best Expo to be even better from his 80 to his 82 card, improving Tim Raines, drafting Charlie Lee. So the Expos are the only team that I have that only has 2 left-handed pitchers on it. And my rationale was that the early 70s Expos often only had 1 or 2 lefties on that team. So we're letting them play with a all right-handed rotation of Rogers, Gullickson, Scott Sanderson, and now Charlie Lee, who they added. Brand new bullpen. So that will be the challenge in the repeat. Pitching, starting pitching will be amazing. The lineup is going to be awesome. But a brand new bullpen. Tim Stoddard, former Oriole closer, comes there. He's the 3rd member of that 1980 Baltimore team to leave. We saw Ken Singleton to the Cubs. We saw Mark Belanger to the Cubs. And now Tim Stoddard here. Brad Havens, a decent lefty, goes to the pen. Rudy May has been moved to the pen. And they have one more reliever to acquire. They haven't acquired yet. I'll probably be bringing back either Elias Sosa or Romo, who played for their team a year ago. That's the 32 teams. And then the other thing we can show you quickly before we call a wrap is the reason why the draft isn't over is that these teams here in this column, they improved this player here. And so by doing that, they have a vacancy in their roster. So every time you see a team name here, they got to plug a hole. And for good reason. Look at these guys who get a lot better. Lou Whitaker, Lloyd Mosby, Cal Ripken, Thon, Wade Boggs. These are guys who have really good years. In this year, 1983, Jerry Mumphrey, Tim Raines. So, yeah, all improved players. Most of these are in 83, but they can be improved in any year. You see some 82s in here. Probably have an 81. Yep, there's a couple of 81s in there. But looking at this quantity list, that is 37 vacancies. So with 37 vacancies in the draft, we can't simply just let anybody pick anybody they want. The process is using the tokens to figure out the waiver order. And how we did this is that draft order is the prime component. The Mariners should have first crack in the draft, first crack at this process. Each team starts with 5 tokens. So Seattle's the team 1 with 5. But during the off season and the draft, every time trades are done, tokens are used to compensate a deal by gaining or losing tokens. And then a grand total is over here. So this little area in between are the equalizers for trades. It's +1 or -1. So 32 teams times 5 is 160 at the beginning and the end. Of course, they balance out, and this is just the number of columns doesn't really matter. It's just places to place these numbers. But it's 106. This is just for accounting purposes, making sure these always add up to 0, the pluses and minuses, and they always add up to 160. So at this point, now the sort is by who has the most tokens. So the Mariners still have 5, but they've been eclipsed by a Twins team with 6, a Padres team with 7, and Florida with 7. One of the teams has the most tokens. It's the Chicago Cubs with 8. So how does the token system work when we have all these roster positions to replace? Is that we have this undrafted free agency, and we have the this is the draft pick in this round. I've set aside record keeping here for if there are 192 players, but most of the time a team will pass and not add or subtract a player. They're happy with what they have. Most teams are happy with what they have. But it starts with the Cubs with 8 tokens here have the first pick of undrafted free agents. Then there are 3 teams who have 7 tokens, including the Cubs, you see. So it's done by the Padres are picking 4th, Florida picks 6th, the Cubs pick 8th, and so that's why these 7s are in that order. Then you see the 6s and the 5s. So let me give you the example of the Cubs. They would pick here with their 8th token, 4th with their 7th token, 8th with their 6th token, and probably right down here, 19th with their 5th token. And then the list goes down like that. So what we do is we sort by tokens and draft order number, and then we subtract the tokens each round, teams, until we go down. You see the numbers, you're just subtracting and sorting until basically you actually get negative numbers, because some teams, of course, have used up all their tokens, so they have negatives, but we still let them sign guys off the street. So that's how you break ties of who is next. So in the case of the Cubs, they would have the first crack of any available free agents to replace any of these guys. It could very well be that the Cubs don't have to replace any of these guys. They might be happy with the 20 guys they have. So obviously everybody has to replace a missing player, but you can also decide to cut guys on your team. I don't know if I have an example of last year's token list here. Let's just draft results. Okay. But we do have the, this is actually the data that we started with 2,560 players, 2,565 players. That's every card accounted for over the period of 4 years. So we started the draft. This is like the backup of all the draftable players. A lot of these players weren't draftable, but it was 2,560 of them. Now that sheet, once you start deleting guys who have already been drafted and their multiple cards that they might have, we're down to 2052. So over 500 cards, records have been removed. And then we're left with the 640, 384 to start, and the 256 draft picks. So we do have 640 reported players for a roster. But remember, we have guys improved, so we have their names on here twice. So that's what has to be removed and replaced with a different card. In this area here, this light green color is alternate years for players presently on a team's roster. If you want to swap into a different year because you like their performance better in a different year, you can elect to do that. You have the 9 guys who are designated as keepers that I mentioned earlier, who can sign with anybody, who should have some talent and would be probably the prime pickups in this process. You still have a nice chunk of players who are put on a retirement list, but they still have a Strat-O-Matic card. You start with 64, of which not all guys exist because they obviously have retired. And you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, about 15, 16 guys. And again, they're probably not going to be very good. And you still have this area, this yellow area. These are guys on waivers. They were placed on waivers, but they still want to play in the game, and they're waiting for a call. And that's They're waiting for this part of the draft, the undrafted free agency. And then lastly, we have guys in each year in this area, this colorless, the white area. This is just years. Sorted by years, we have guys from 1980 who have not been in the league yet. And so what I have done is, I've done a sort of hitters starting with OPS, starting with 796, which is very high, and that player happens to be Jim Dwyer, which is interesting. So Jim Dwyer is available with his 80 card. He's the best available hitter at 796 in 1980, but his number will come up again. I'll get to that. Pitchers, Frank LaCourty is the best available pitcher available with a 125 whip in 1980 based on those sort criteria. Then we do the same thing with 1981. Here it's Von Hayes with a 741 OPS. He's available. He's looking for work. Pitching wise, Ed Lynch with a 123 whip. John Littlefield looking for work. And then we go to 1982. And there's Jim Dwyer again with a 900 OPS. I've never seen this. This is a guy who has had 2 outstanding cards, and he's not been picked yet. So I think Dwyer should most certainly get picked up by somebody. We know there's 37 roster spots available. You think the top OPS guy in 2 different years would get picked in one of them. 900 OPS waiting to be picked. And then you have Steve Bedrosian. So what happened here is that the Atlanta Braves had no room for Bedrosian because they had Rick Camp, they had Gene Garber, they had Kevin Sauché. So it didn't make sense to have 4 closers on one team. So Bedrosian's just sitting out there waiting to be plucked away to another organization. Unbelievable he's still out there. And then lastly, we have the 1983 players. Now these guys still are protected. That's why I didn't do a resort of them. These are still sorted by the team they got drafted into in the 1983 draft. Let me give you an example of a guy. So Atlee Hammaker is here as protected by the Giants. Now Hammaker has a 2.25 ERA in 1983 and pitched in the All-Star game. But the Giants are protecting him. They're saying, okay, nobody's getting him. We don't need him this year. We'll probably get him next year or the year after. But right now, we're slamming the door so that nobody can steal him away from us. So that's how this works, so you don't lose your rookies. They get protected in the 4th year of this process. And then beyond that, of course, we've got the nameless player cards that are created that are undraftable. We don't draft nameless player cards. And so the data is pretty clean at this point to begin the token process, which would be that's one of my favorite parts of the draft. It's how to get the final pieces that all teams need to get the league ready to start play. So that's the end of the 1980-83 8-round draft and the preparation for undrafted free agency. Thanks for tuning into this, and we'll see you next time.